Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and this video is going to be an explanation of the parts and internal family systems that are involved in an addiction cycle. So I remember a little bit before I met IFS, as I say, I had this, what felt like an epiphany at the time. I realized that any kind of addiction, whether it was alcohol, pornography, a work addiction, um, you know, video gaming, social media, whatever it was, that shaming the behavior, I would have said at the time, fueled the behavior, that it just wasn't effective, right? That the common strategy, it seemed, whether it was religion or even a lot of types of therapy, it was, let me just shame you into submission. Don't you see that you are wreaking havoc on yourself and on your relationships and on your body and you're extreme? And so just stop it, right? What was that old comedy clip where the therapist says, pay me $5, tell me your problem, and he says, stop it, just stop it, right? So as if that would work, right? To just tell parts of us, just stop your behavior. Don't you see, to try to reason, don't you see? And that's really a manager trying to reason with a firefighter. Now, if you've watched some of the past videos in this series on the IFS Basics, you can go back and watch them if you want. I do a whole video about managers and about firefighters. And there's one about exiles and self and all of it. I'm going to put it all together in this video. But managers are usually elicited in, or solicited in religion, in education, in government, criminal justice, just culture in general, right? Therapy often. The managers are held up as, yes, you do your job and work really hard to suppress this bad behavior, either of the firefighter or the exile. And so there's this constant war going on. Um, but it just doesn't work. And that's what I had finally realized. I'm like, wait, shaming and judging this quote unquote bad behavior only makes it worse. And so I got curious about why that happened. And as I learned IFS, I began to really understand what was happening. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, my handy dandy PowerPoint. And let me make myself bigger so that you can see me. All right, so this is an explanation of the shame addiction cycle, but it's really with just so many dynamics of extreme parts in your system. So you might identify it, the specifics might be different, right? But the dynamic is the same. And so I have here the three parts: exiles, firefighters, and managers. Sometimes I'll present this upside down with the exile on the bottom, only because it shows maybe that the exile is underneath the firefighter manager behavior or is kind of at the root. But it really is more like a cycle. And I'm going to explain kind of what happens and how that happens. And if you haven't already, you might want to go back and check out a video that I did on, it's from Martha Sweezy's book on shame and guilt. And it's all about the shame cycle, which really, really beautifully describes, I think there's 6 parts to it, but describes all the parts and how they play a role in the whole shame cycle. So you can search for that on my on my YouTube channel. But basically and you can kind of enter anywhere in here like a cycle. It's just kind of the chicken or the egg, it's all kind of happening. But often what happens first is that the pain of an exile, which we've talked about, right, is the extreme emotions and beliefs that that part of us holds. because they had this really traumatic experience where they felt terror and shame and pain and were harmed, and they didn't have a healthy attunement or connection in that moment. And so they took on beliefs like, I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough, I'm too much, um, the world is very dangerous, those kinds of things. And so when that pain of an exile essentially breaks through into our consciousness, because often, again, our managers are trying to keep that pain down, but it doesn't work. You know, maybe someone in our environment really shames us, or, you know, in our current environment, and it reminds us of this wound or this experience. Or it could even, honestly, it could be a song that comes on the radio. It could be something we smell. It could be a taste. It could be a perfume, right? It could be just anything that activates the memory of that trauma. Then these incredibly intense emotions and beliefs start coming up to the surface. Basically, our exiles coming out of the unconscious, out of exile into the conscious. And at that point, that's when, as we talked about, the firefighter will come in. And their whole job is emergency mode. We've got to numb, escape, deflect, distract from this pain. And so often their strategy is something that is considered an addiction in our culture, right? I'm going to use alcohol, or I'm going to just watch pornography, or uh, I'm going to, it could be, honestly, it could be, I'm going to just read another self-help book. Or sometimes, honestly, meditation can even be used as a firefighter. A lot of times people will call it a spiritual bypassing part, right? This pain is just so unbearable. I have to do something to get out of the present moment, to get away from this pain. So whatever strategy that is, right, that our system has worked basically for our system in the past. And so particularly with substances, right, like whether it's alcohol, or, you know, some other drug or substance that is numbing the pain, we take a little bit of it, it effectively numbs the pain, but then the way our physiology works is that now it will no longer do that unless we take a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And so as it gets more and more extreme, and actually that happens with other things too, we need more pornography, we need to shop more, we need to read another self-help book, we need to numb, 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 because essentially it doesn't work. The firefighter is a young part as well. They have found a strategy that is the best they could do, right? To get away from the pain for a little while, and to maybe get the exile to go underground again, and to be okay for some period of time. But because the exile is not healed, it will come up again, and this cycle will continue, right? Like we said in the firefighter video, a firefighter cannot stop what they're doing until what they protect in the exile is healed. And so if we're just trying to escape it, numb it, deflect it, but not actually healing the exile, that behavior is just going to continue, right? It's not going to be able to stop. But because the firefighter behavior is so extreme and is often socially unacceptable, because it destroys relationships, it destroys our bodies, different things like that. The socialized manager who has learned that the firefighter is bad, 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 comes in to harshly criticize the firefighter's behavior. Um, Now, sometimes, in my experience, the manager is also harshly criticizing the exile. Like, I have, and so that's how I see some self-harming parts. If you watch the last video about firefighters, self-harming parts can have different motivations. They might be trying to distract you, so they're a firefighter, or they may be trying to scold and criticize and shame uh, the exile, right? By saying, just stop it and cussing the exile out because they feel like that's the only way to try to get them to go away. So I've had confusion in my own system about some of my really, really harsh inner critics that Jay Early would call a destroyer, or Dick Schwartz would call a murderous part, right? Because they want to murder the exile. They're saying your pain and sensitivity is not okay. So they're not actually pointing at a firefighter, they're pointing at the exile. But because that part comes in immediately on the heels of the exile coming up, I've thought of that part more as a firefighter. Um, but it also kind of has an inner critic manager role. So it doesn't matter to me. All I know is that there are parts, big inner critics, that can come up and direct either toward the firefighter, you terrible, terrible person. How dare you be addicted to this thing? Don't you see how it's affecting your family and yourself? How could you keep doing that thing even though it's so shameful, right? So the manager is criticizing the firefighter, but they may also criticize the exile and say how sensitive you are, how pathetic you are. Um, why do you have to have such big emotions? You're too much, right? So they're kind of reinforcing the wound of the exile. Because the exile's belief is, I'm too much, I'm shameful. And the critic is saying, yeah, you are. You deserve to die, right? And so you can see how the cycle is just fueled. So the shaming by the manager activates more of the exile's pain, which then escalates the firefighter to come in more, which elicits more berating by the manager, more pain from the exile. Firefighters got to work harder. And so it's really just this really, really painful place to be, um, where all of these parts are working really, really hard, or the exile is feeling a lot of suffering and pain, and the firefighter's working really hard, and the manager is working really, really hard because it thinks if I just criticize the firefighter and the exile enough, they'll go underground and then we'll be okay, right? Because again, just like I said, that's all the firefighter knows. It's all the manager knows. That's what they've learned from people outside of them because often, like I said, culturally, religion, education, family systems, uh, criminal justice, all of these systems are authoritarian, which means that they use punishment and fear of punishment to motivate. They really sanction using managers to try to suppress and punish firefighter and exile parts. They think that's the only way to get them to behave, right? And yet there's no curiosity about why does the exile feel this pain? Why does the firefighter feel like it has to do this extreme behavior? Um, it's not what's wrong with you. And I need to scold that wrong, that bad out of you. It's what happened to you. How do you make sense? So the cycle continues on until the protectors are appreciated and the exile is healed by self. So I like to imagine in this image that all of the white space is the self, that the self holds all of these parts with genuine love and equanimity and gets curious about how they make sense, right? Can go to a firefighter, even one who is extreme, who has intense addiction, feels like they cannot stop numbing, maybe self-harming parts, even suicidal parts, raging parts, and says, tell me how you make sense. Tell me what you're afraid would happen if you didn't do this. And likely that part will say, you will be taken over by unbearable pain that you cannot handle. And then you can ask the firefighter, how old do you think I am? Who do you see when you look at me? because you might be blended with a manager or another part, or they might think you're the exile. So you really want to update them. I am genuinely coming to you with appreciation for how hard you've worked for me. I see that you really, really want to help me escape pain. But what if I could go, this adult loving self that's in front of you, could go to that part that holds all that pain, and I could be with them and I could give them what they need, and they could be secure, and they could be healed and not have to carry all that pain anymore. Would you have to keep doing this? And the firefighter might not believe it, and they'll say, knock yourself out. You can try, right? That's all the buy-in you need. And then you can go to the exile, or perhaps you have a manager that's blocking the way from you even talking to the firefighter, right? There's a manager that's like, don't you dare go to that addictive part or that raging part or that self-harming part. They're going to take over and they're going to ruin your life. And so you start with the manager with appreciation. I see you. I appreciate your effort. I get that the firefighter is being really extreme and does have negative impact. I validate that. But I know that there's a reason why they're doing it. And if you let me go to them, I am even bigger than them. And I can listen to them and I can help them with what they protect so that they don't have to be so extreme anymore. Um, And, again, managers really need to be appreciated for all the effort. They're often young parts who learned very early on how to be socially acceptable to save your life culturally, to protect you, right? To not do things that are antisocial like firefighters do. And so they need to be appreciated and their concerns need to be met, that you're not trying to let the firefighter take over, that you want to help them and that you can help them. And again, managers, because they're so used to kind of being the adult in the system, they're really parentified children usually, maybe a little bit older, from 6 to 16. I don't know. You can ask them how old they are. They'll tell you if you just can receive from them. Um, I have managers that are anywhere from 3 to 20s. So, and then other parts who are older but are kind of have lots of parts in them. We won't go into that. But the manager um, needs to be appreciated, and there needs to be a real allyship between the self and these protective parts that have been working so hard in the system. They don't need to be pushed aside and told like, get out of here, I got this. You really treat them with respect and admiration and say, I know you've been working in this system for a really long time. You know what you're doing. You know the exiles. You know the history. Um, can you come alongside me? Can you stand with me? However, I want to give you hope because I know that ultimately you haven't been able to stop this cycle. You haven't been able to keep the exile's pain from coming up or to actually heal it. So as much as these parts, the managers and firefighters have worked so hard, right? They don't have the capacity to actually cure or heal the system. And so you're offering them that hope that yourself, who's not a part, does have the ability to do that. And if they will just do an experiment to see if the self can do that, then if the exile can be healed, the managers and firefighters can naturally relax and take on new roles, right? They can go on adventures and be creative and lend energy to your system that you didn't have before because they had to work so hard to be hypervigilant or create numbing strategies. Um, so in the next video, let me stop sharing this. In the next video, I am excited to go over the entire IFS process. And it's not always completely linear, or I present it in a cycle, but it's it's not always exactly like that. We'll go over some of that, but I think it's really helpful a lot of times for your intellectual parts first to understand what the path looks like so that they're not afraid of it, because a lot of times parts can be really afraid to go, understandably, to exiles who are stuck in trauma because the exiles in the past have threatened to really overwhelm the system. So for them to understand what the healing path looks like before they agree to do it, it can sometimes be really helpful. So in the next video, I'll explain the entire IFS process. And if you have any questions about what I shared today about the addiction cycle, I was going to say too, I really recommend the work of Cease Sykes. There's a whole workbook about using IFS with addiction that Cease Sykes has done. I think she might have another book as well. And of course, the book that I reviewed recently by Dick's wife, Jean Catanzaro, called Unburdened Eating, is really about this cycle where food is used addictive in an addictive cycle. But she talks about all kinds of other things, you know, the cultural burdens, the legacy burdens, different ways that parts um, orient around food and body image. But if you have any questions about what I presented here about the addiction cycle or any comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments below.